let me just start off by saying that I may be addicted to coffee. Like, I literally sweat, and I think my sweat smells a little bit like coffee. Even my urine. Sometimes I go pee and it smells kind of like coffee. I actually looked in the mirror earlier, and I think my head is starting to become a coffee bean, or at least shaped like one. I don't know, coffee. I'm addicted to it. Anyways, let's get straight into today's video. I just drank a nice strong cup of coffee and I am ready to go. And by the way, in case you guys are wondering how I take my coffee, it's dark like my soul, okay? I don't like any additives. I don't like any sugar. Matter of fact, I'll just chew on the beans myself, okay? That's how I'll take my coffee. Anyways, all jokes aside, in today's video, we're actually going to get pretty serious. I said that I wasn't going to talk about this or cover it, but there are two big controversies. I wouldn't even say they're controversies. That's maybe being a little melodramatic, but there are two big conversational topics happening within the action figure community, and that is the whole NECA situation with a consumer, and we'll get into that a little bit later, and then this deluxe 2-pack set piece that McFarlane is offering for $250 that's supposed to be based in the Joker film. And before we get into it, I'll give you guys my personal take on the Joker film. I think it's an absolute garbage movie. I love Joaquin Phoenix, and I think he gives an absolutely spectacular performance here. And he's not a one-trick pony. A lot of people may not be too familiar with him, but this is a guy that actually was in a movie where his character falls in love with like an AI program. Yes, you heard that correctly. It's not a joke. Like, he actually falls in love. It's like the equivalent of you falling in love with Siri. Although I will say the AI in this particular film is Scarlett Johansson's voice. So I don't really blame him. I mean, I guess anybody could fall in love with her voice. Have you heard her talk? Anyways, I keep getting off track here. But seriously, it's a good, solid film. If you guys want to go check it out. I didn't like it. I don't like the way that Joker's portrayed. I don't like the storyline. This is kind of like a film made by people that don't understand DC comic books, and I just don't like the origin story. I've never liked the idea that Joker's like some sort of stand-up comedian that doesn't make it. I know he's funny and he has like this really dark sense of humor, but to me, he's always been a criminal. I don't think that like the world beat him into being the Joker. I just think he was kind of born that way, and I just don't think that this was a very good film. But to each their own. Like I said, Joaquin Phoenix performance was absolutely phenomenal, and if anything, I think it's worth checking it out just for his performance alone. And I'm gonna try to do a little bit of tiny little reptilian brain math here, okay? Because I know a lot of people have their different takes on how much this set should cost, and I'm going to try to give him the benefit of the doubt here. I'm not going all out on McFarlane here just yet. Let's just assume that both figures are like a part of the DC Collector's Edition line. I know that's not the case, bear with me, but let's just assume that maybe the legal rights were a little bit more expensive than other figures, just because they have to be represented in action figure form. So let's just say that they had to pay a little bit of a premium for each particular actor. Like maybe Joaquin Phoenix asked for a little bit more, or maybe Robert De Niro, although I'm not sure how that works, because I just assume that when you sign up for a movie, that particular motion picture just owns the rights to that particular character, so they can manufacture as many different products as they want with your face on it. I thought that was like built into like the whole marketing campaign and as a part of your contract, but like, I don't know. I don't work in that side of the business. Let's just assume that that's what happened. You do get both figures, an extra, like, I don't know, was it like 6 hands total, 3 pairs of hands, a handgun, a couple of extra face plates, and then a few other accessories. It comes with some sort of metal sign, a poster, and then a few other things, as well as the actual set piece. Now, how much that should really cost, I think, is a matter of personal perspective. I think beauty is in the eye of the beholder, as the saying goes. I know like the live action old school 60s Batman series action figure line, those sets were much less intricate. I think they were a little bit more simplistic. It was just kind of like plastic. There was very little paint, and there wasn't as much detail attached to those particular sets. So I guess you could make the argument that these are like higher end diorama sets. And even if you make that argument, let's say those figures, or let's say the entire set usually is worth like $70, which I think is a little bit of a markup, but let's just assume that. my tiny little reptilian brain is telling me that this should cost somewhere along the lines of like 130 to 140. And again, I'm being very conservative here. I'm thinking like as an OM more than a consumer. Myself as a consumer, I wouldn't go as high as 140, but let's just assume that there were more costs attached to this particular set than any other set that McFarlane has ever released or any other figures. Eventually, McFarlane would actually release a statement online, which honestly just made things a little bit more interesting, way more convoluted. It was kind of like this really weird cryptic message that nobody really understood. And honestly, everybody is kind of like understanding the message in a completely different way. The way that I read it, or at least how my tiny reptilian brain understands it, essentially it sounds like there's either potentially like a third party agency, maybe something that like maybe the government brought in an agency that restricts certain things, and then if you don't follow those restrictions, maybe there's like an extra fee or a fine, which again, this is just kind of like purely theoretical. Maybe that's happening, and that's why there's a slight little markup, because McFarlane knew that there would be some sort of fine from like this third party agency, or it's just Warner Bros. Like maybe in the contract McFarlane received the license for any DC line, more specifically now that like the DC multiverse, the DC direct lines and all those, maybe they made a footnote in that contract stipulating that if they cross certain lines or stepped out of bounds when it came down to manufacturing collectibles that had very violent backgrounds, maybe very similar to the first theory, maybe they had like some sort of restrictions, and then if they crossed over, maybe they would have some sort of fine, or maybe they would have to like pay some sort of penalty for that. I should repeat, this is purely theoretical, but in my mind it makes way more sense that in the contract Warner Bros. Maybe wrote something in there that if McFarlane ever crossed the line that they were not comfortable with, that maybe there would be some financial repercussions, and that's exactly what we are seeing here. Now, personally, I'm not sure if maybe they're contractually obligated to not really speak on the specifics of why this price point is what it is, but I will say it's very interesting for McFarlane to take the risk, because in my mind it really doesn't make sense. First of all, the original Joker film didn't have like a huge following. It does have kind of a cult following, but it's not like something that people are passionately asking for. Like, I don't think there were people out there that wanted an Arthur Morgan in action figure form, at least not at this particular point. I think maybe eventually, if the film continued to garner a little bit more attention, maybe people would ask for it. But it just seems like kind of a weird stance for McFarlane to take, for him to say this is the film that we're going to risk it all on. And again, just in my mind, doesn't really make a lot of sense. There is a potential for them to lose money on this on the back end. I've looked at a number of different retailers, and most of them are still in stock. There's the potential that he has to drop a discount on this set, and that could really cut into their profits. So it's just kind of a really weird thing to do here. If it was like a really old school project, a really old school film that has like a really big fan base that people are just rabid about, that have been asking for a particular collectible for maybe like decades, I would understand that. But the Joker, really, this is what you decide to kind of like die on the hill for? It really doesn't make any sense, and it's not really like a very coveted set in my personal opinion, and the sales are really showcasing that. But now obviously it may have to do with the price point. Maybe if it had been closer to like maybe 150, maybe there would be support, but there's just no way of knowing. Like I said, I think they're contractually obligated to keep everything under wraps, so I don't think we'll ever know exactly what it is that happened with this particular set. But I think McFarlane made a huge mistake here, because like I said, if this was like a set that we'd been waiting for years, if there's that nostalgia factor, if people are like really rabid and just hungry for that collectible, I would understand why he would take the risk, but it just makes no sense. Like I said, Joker, really, I personally don't really see what the point was here, and I think there's a huge risk factor involved here. So personally, I'm not really interested in it. I'm not going to pick it up, and I'm not going to tell anybody how to spend their money, but I think there is a high possibility this entire set eventually goes on sale. Not only that, I think there is a possibility down the road to see a single release Arthur Morgan Joker action figure with the likeness of Joaquin Phoenix. There's no way they just go, to utilize everything that they have for one figure and then just never re-release or reuse that body mold in those face sculpts or those face plates. I think eventually they'll go later down the line and they'll release the Arthur Morgan action figure in a single release format. Now, moving on to the second kind of quote unquote controversy. I'm not really going to get too deep into it because it seems like everybody and their grandmother has talked about this, but there was this huge debacle with the whole the layered diorama set that that NECA just decided to release not too long ago. This was a highly anticipated dio set. People that are, huge TMNT fans or huge NECA fans decided to pick this up. It was going for a decent price point, I think like $300. And there was this huge concern initially with how this figure or how this set, I think, was being stalled out, or a lot of people were having issues actually receiving it in hand. And then finally we got confirmation that somehow, some way, NECA sent a lot of duplicates. A lot of people were getting 2 of these dio sets when they had only purchased 1, and NECA decided in all of their infinite wisdom to send out this really weird message to all of the consumers, everybody that had purchased this, and essentially told them, hey, you need to send out that extra that we sent you. You need to send it back to us. We're going to provide you a shipping label. You can go out to, and I'm not sure who the mailer was or what service they used, but you would slap the label on it. You would just take it to UPS or FedEx or whatever the case, and then they would just ship it back, and you would receive a $100 credit to your account. What's interesting is by the time a lot of these collectors had received this, a lot of them had already flipped the dio set. I'm not sure what they had done to it. Maybe they had sold it to a local collector or resold it on eBay. It's interesting that NECA waited this long, or they were behind the curve by quite a bit. There were a lot of people now that don't have the dio set, and a lot of people had already kind of flipped it and made quite a bit of a profit. But it was interesting the way that NECA worded this, because it seemed, and I've said this before, I'm not sure who's sending these emails out, if it's like a sales representative or if it's somebody that's in the complaints department or, something to do with customer service. But the way that these emails were worded just seemed very unprofessional. Eventually, for those people that had not sent out the extra, that they had not returned it and they hadn't received that $100 credit, I believe that NECA, and again, I'm receiving this second hand because I didn't buy the dio set, but it appears that eventually they decided to kind of double down and send a second email essentially saying, hey, if you don't send this out, you're an evil person that doesn't have a conscience. And then on top of that, we're actually going to bar you or potentially bar you from, purchasing any of our items in the foreseeable future, which, by the way, they can't really enforce it, or I think they can only enforce it to a certain degree. It's not like they're going to have representatives at every Target and Walmart just blocking people from purchasing NECA action figures. I'm assuming that they are referring to only through the website. I'm not even sure how they would even do that. Maybe they would flag your address. But then again, there are workarounds. You could just pay, you could just, have your mom or your dad, purchase it and then just give them the money. So it's not like the end of the world. Let's say theoretically you don't send the dio set back, you just already sold it or gave it away to somebody else. There are ways to work around it. Like I said, just use I don't know, your best friend's, address and, their credit card info, and just, there are ways. It's not the end of the world, but at the same time, it just felt so unprofessional for them to handle the situation this way. To me, it seems like they're going to have to go back into production and get these dio sets out there, because there are still quite a few people that have not received it. And all of this is just a really big conversational topic about how these OEMs are just mishandling a lot of their releases. And I'm not sure what exactly is happening. I think NECA has already had a couple of these issues where people didn't receive the product. And then there are now people that haven't received it that are having a really tough time communicating with NECA. And they're out now about $300. So this is just a very interesting situation. And I'll give you guys my personal perspective, my opinion. I didn't pick up the dio set, but let's say I had received multiples. My personal opinion, once I had received that email about the $100 credit, and even before that, I would say I would probably do the right thing and, reach out to them and try to figure out a way to get them, the extra the dio piece back. I know there are some people that, hypothetically say, well, they should have come to my front door and pick it up in their nice, beautiful Lexus, you know, brand new vehicles. They're not going to do that. Let's be realistic. The best case scenario is they give you a little bit of a credit and you send it back. I think it's the correct way. It's the correct way to handle the situation, because the world has, you know, crazy turns, and there could be the possibility that in the foreseeable future something like this happens to you and you would be out high and dry. You wouldn't be able to receive the dial set. So just my personal opinion, my 2 cents. I think the way the NECA handled the situation is just completely unprofessional, and it's almost laughable. But then at the same time, I do feel that a lot of the consumers are just kind of blowing things out of proportion. They're making it seem like NECA are like these big mobsters that are just taking advantage of people. They make mistakes. We all make mistakes. And I think, you know, especially if you're like a big rabid consumer of theirs, like if you're a big fan of theirs, you definitely don't want to see this go down the route of like NECA in the next couple of years filing for bankruptcy, because I don't know how big of a hit NECA is going to take on this dial set. Let's assume that everybody that got doubles isn't going to send it back. Let's assume that it's like a few hundred customers. Could you imagine how big of a hit they're going to take? I know a lot of the times we always assume like these big giant OMs are, you know, multi-billion-dollar companies, but a lot of the time they're not that big, especially NECA. You know, their profit margins are not always as great, and that's one of the big main reasons why their price points are usually higher. So you have to take that into consideration. And if you're a big fan of theirs, you definitely don't want them to take the hit and then eventually not be able to receive TMNT collectibles for quite some time until somebody else picks up the license, because, you know, NECA mishandled it and they lost the license for some unknown reason. Again, it's not our fault. It's not our responsibility, but it's just something to think about when you're considering sending the collectible back or not. But again, this is just my personal humble opinion. I think that it's a very interesting conversation to have within the community. I'm very curious to see what you guys have to say. Let me know down below in the comment section. As always, make sure to stay safe out there and enjoy the hobby. I know it can be kind of difficult with OMs doing all of this nonsense, but let's not forget why we got into the hobby. It's about enjoying it. It's about posing your action figures, you know, just having fun with them, displaying them. That's the most important part of all this. Let me know your thoughts down below. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you.